My name's Ethan. I'm 28, and last weekend was supposed to be one of the best days of my life. After years of working 2 jobs, eating instant noodles, and living in a cramped apartment with paper-thin walls, I finally bought my first house. Nothing huge or fancy, a modest 3-bedroom with a little backyard and a creaky porch swing, but to me, it was perfect. It was mine. No landlords, no roommates, no one telling me what I could or couldn't hang on the walls. I signed the closing papers on a Thursday and immediately started planning a housewarming for Saturday. It wasn't going to be extravagant, just some snacks, a few drinks, and a chance for everyone to see the place I had worked so hard for. I spent Friday night cleaning, arranging furniture, and even stringing up cheap fairy lights in the living room to make it look warm and inviting. There was this giddy, nervous excitement in my chest as I pictured my parents walking in and smiling, my younger brother cracking a joke about how I finally had a kitchen big enough to burn toast in, my cousins laughing and exploring all the rooms. For once, I thought we'd be together for something I accomplished, not for one of my brother's endless milestones. My brother, Caleb, is 26. He's the golden child. No other way to put it. Growing up, he got the praise, the new clothes, the soccer trophies displayed in the living room. I was the quiet one, the kid who figured out how to fix things around the house so Dad didn't have to call a plumber. I didn't mind most of the time. Caleb was more outgoing and charming, so it made sense he got more attention. But as we got older, the favoritism became harder to ignore. When Caleb got a promotion, the whole family went out to dinner. When I graduated college, my parents sent a congrats text with a thumbs-up emoji. I told myself I wouldn't let that bitterness ruin my housewarming. This was about celebrating something good. The morning of the party, I woke up early, practically buzzing. I set out drinks on the counter, made sure there were enough chairs, and even bought a cake that said, "Welcome home, Ethan," in blue icing. I sent a group text reminder. "Hey everyone, housewarming starts at 5. Can't wait to see you." My phone stayed quiet except for a single thumbs up from my cousin Jessica. I shrugged it off. Maybe everyone was busy getting ready. 5 o'clock rolled around. The lights were on. Music was playing softly from a Bluetooth speaker, and I stood by the front window, waiting for the first car to pull up. By 5:30, no one had come. By 6 o'clock, I was pacing around the kitchen, checking my phone every 30 seconds. Finally, I opened Instagram out of boredom, and that's when I saw it. My entire family was tagged in a photo, standing in my parents' driveway, grinning from ear to ear in front of Caleb's brand new car, a shiny black luxury SUV with a giant red bow on top. My mom's caption read, "So proud of you, Caleb. You deserve this." Comment after comment from relatives said things like, "What a beauty," and "Congrats, champ." My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen for a long moment before I set my phone down and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cake I'd bought. The house felt unbearably quiet, the fairy lights suddenly looking silly and sad. I didn't cry, though. I just sat there and let the disappointment settle in like a heavy blanket I couldn't shake off. Around 7:15, just as I was about to start packing up the food, my phone lit up with Mom's name. I hesitated, then picked up. "Ethan," she said, without even a hello. "We need to talk about the house." Her tone wasn't congratulatory. It was serious, clipped. For a moment, I thought maybe she was going to apologize for missing the party, but something in her voice made my chest tighten. "What about it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We think it would make sense if Caleb stayed there during the week," she said matter-of-factly, as though she was talking about borrowing a lawn mower and not my entire house. I blinked, stunned into silence. "You just bought it, sure, but his job is closer to that area, and he needs a place to stay during the work week," she continued, as if the logistics were already settled. "You wouldn't even notice. He'd just sleep there, maybe keep some clothes in one of the rooms. It's only fair to help him out, considering how expensive his car was." I didn't say anything at first. My fingers dug into the edge of the table as I stared at the glowing cake across from me, its frosting still perfectly smooth and untouched. "Mom," I finally said slowly, "this is my house. I worked for this. And we're proud of you," she replied quickly, like she was checking a box. "But family helps each other. Don't be selfish about this." I swallowed hard, feeling a strange mix of anger and disbelief simmering in my chest. As she kept talking, explaining why it just made sense for my younger brother to essentially take over my new place, I found myself looking around my empty living room, the one I had cleaned for hours, the one no one had shown up to celebrate. For the first time, it hit me that this wasn't just a thoughtless request. It was something bigger something that had been building for years, and if I gave in now, it would never stop. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch as my mom waited for me to agree. My heart was pounding, my hands still clenched around the phone, and all I could think was, they had skipped my housewarming to celebrate my brother, and now they wanted the house, too. And that's when I decided something, but I didn't say it yet. I just said, "We'll talk later," and hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, my mind racing. Something inside me was shifting, hardening, because if they thought this was going to be easy, they had no idea what was coming next. After I hung up, the house felt even quieter than before. I walked to the living room, turned off the fairy lights, and sat on the floor with my back against the couch. It wasn't just about them missing my housewarming anymore. It was about everything. Years of feeling like I was second place, like every milestone of mine was just a footnote in someone else's story. I thought about how Mom used to keep Caleb's soccer jerseys framed in the hallway, while my college degree was still sitting in the box it came in. The next morning, I woke up to 6 unread messages in the family group chat. The first one was from Mom. "Ethan, we really need to discuss Caleb using the house." The next was from Dad. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." My stomach twisted. It wasn't just a request anymore. It was an expectation. Then came a message from Caleb himself. "Hey, bro, Mom said you're being weird about this. Chill. It's just a couple nights a week. I'll bring my own food." I stared at that text for a good minute before tossing my phone onto the bed. Just a couple nights a week. Just that word. Just made me want to laugh bitterly. It wasn't just a couple nights a week. It was me giving up my privacy, my space, the one thing I had worked so hard to get. By noon, Mom called again. This time, I let it ring, but she immediately followed up with a voicemail. Her voice was sweet, almost rehearsed. "Ethan, honey, we just want what's best for everyone. Caleb has so much pressure right now. He needs support. You know how stressful his job is. We're counting on you to do the right thing." I played the message twice, my jaw tightening each time. It was the same tactic as always. Make me feel guilty until I agree. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house because I didn't want this to spiral over text. When I pulled up, Caleb's new car was still in the driveway, gleaming like it had been washed just minutes ago. I knocked on the door, and Mom answered, looking pleasantly surprised, like nothing was wrong. "Ethan, finally," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. "Come in. Let's talk about the house." I stepped inside, glancing around. Dad was sitting in his recliner, flipping through the mail. Caleb was on the couch, grinning like this was all some kind of joke. "So," Mom began, sitting down across from me. "We've been thinking." "You mean you've been deciding?" I interrupted, my voice calm but flat. She blinked, clearly not expecting me to cut in. "Deciding? You already told Caleb he could stay there, didn't you?" I asked, glancing toward my brother. Caleb shrugged, not even looking guilty. "Well, yeah. I figured you'd be fine with it." That was the moment something in me clicked. It wasn't just that they had asked me. They had already made the decision for me. My opinion, my ownership of my house, didn't seem to matter at all. "You can't just decide that for me," I said slowly, keeping my voice level. "This is my home. You don't get to hand it out like it's an extra bedroom in your house." Mom's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Ethan, we're not trying to take anything from you. This is family. You have a responsibility to look out for each other." "I have been looking out for everyone for years," I said, my voice rising slightly despite my best effort to stay calm. "I helped pay for Caleb's tuition. I loaned him money when he wrecked his first car. I even fixed your washing machine for free when you said you couldn't afford a repairman. At what point do I get to have something that's just mine?" The room went quiet for a beat. Dad finally looked up from the mail, frowning. "Don't take that tone with your mother. She's just trying to keep this family together by taking my house." I shot back before I could stop myself. Caleb rolled his eyes. "You're being dramatic. I'm not asking for a key to the safe, just a place to crash. I thought we were closer than this." The manipulation was so obvious it almost made me laugh. Caleb wasn't the one making sacrifices. I was. He was the one everyone catered to, and I was expected to smile and make it easier for him. "I'm not agreeing to anything today," I said, finally standing up. "I need time to think." Mom stood too, looking frustrated. "Ethan, don't make this into a bigger deal than it is. If you keep dragging this out, Caleb will have to spend money on a rental, and that's just wasteful." I didn't say anything else. I just left. That night, I got another message, this time from my aunt. "Hey, I heard about the house thing. Don't be selfish. Caleb really needs the help." I stared at the message, realizing that Mom must have called half the family to tell them her version of the story. Suddenly, I wasn't just dealing with my immediate family. I was being painted as the villain to everyone. The next day, Dad showed up at my house unannounced. I was sitting on the porch when he pulled into the driveway. He didn't even say hello. "You need to stop making this so hard," he said, walking up to me. "This isn't a big deal. Your brother has always been there for you." I almost laughed. Always been there for me. When? When I worked double shifts so he could borrow money for spring break. Or when I had to take the bus because he totaled my car and you said we couldn't afford to fix it. Dad's face tightened. "You're keeping score now? That's not what family does." I stood, finally feeling the anger boiling over. "No, Dad. What family doesn't do is take advantage of one kid just to make life easier for the other." He didn't like that. He muttered something about me being ungrateful and left without another word. For the next few days, the messages kept coming. Guilt trips, little digs, subtle threats about how disappointed they were in me. Each one was like a brick being added to a wall between us. By the end of the week, I had stopped replying entirely, but I wasn't just sitting in silence. Every night after work, I'd sit at my kitchen table with a notepad, thinking, if they were willing to push this hard before Caleb had even stayed a single night, what would happen if I gave in? Would they start telling me what furniture to buy? What room he could have? What nights he'd be there? No, I wasn't going to let that happen. I didn't know exactly how I was going to handle it yet, but one thing was certain. The next time they came to me about the house, I wouldn't be caught off guard. And judging by the message I got from Mom that Friday, "We're coming by tomorrow to talk. Be home." That time was coming sooner than I thought. I closed my phone, took a deep breath, and looked around my house. The house that was mine. For the first time in days, I felt something sharper than sadness. Resolve. If they wanted a conversation, they were going to get one. Saturday morning came with an uneasy quiet. I woke up earlier than usual, not because of an alarm, but because my mind wouldn't let me sleep in. Mom's text from last night echoed in my head. "We're coming by tomorrow to talk. Be home." It wasn't a request. It was an order. I tried to distract myself by tidying up, but every sound in the house felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, even the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. Around 10 a.m., a car door slammed outside. My stomach tightened as I peeked through the window. Sure enough, my parents were walking up the path to my front porch, Caleb trailing behind them with a cocky grin and a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I opened the door before they could knock. "Morning," Mom said briskly, brushing past me like she owned the place. Dad followed, looking grim, and Caleb walked in last, glancing around like he was inspecting the property. "Nice place," he said casually, setting the duffel bag down by the couch. I frowned. "What's that?" "My stuff," he replied with a shrug. "Thought I'd save us all time, since we already know how this is going to go." That single sentence made my blood run cold. They hadn't just come to talk. They had come to move him in. Mom turned to me, clasping her hands together like she was about to deliver good news. "Ethan, we've thought about this a lot. It just makes sense. Caleb's commute is brutal, and this house is sitting here with extra space. Why wouldn't we make use of it?" I crossed my arms, my pulse starting to quicken. "Because it's my house, and you didn't ask. You just assumed I'd go along with it." Dad sighed, already looking impatient. "Son, this is a practical solution. Stop being so stubborn." Caleb flopped onto the couch, pulling out his phone like he was settling in for the afternoon. "I don't get why you're making this such a big deal. You've got 3 bedrooms. You'll barely even notice I'm here." I stared at him, then at the duffel bag on the floor. The sheer audacity of it hit me all at once. They hadn't just ignored my feelings. They had already decided for me. "No," I said finally, my voice firm. Mom blinked. "No, no," I repeated, louder this time. "Caleb's not staying here. Not for a night. Not for a week. Not at all." For a split second, there was silence. Then Mom's expression hardened. "Ethan, don't be ridiculous," she said sharply. "We drove all the way here. Caleb took time off to get ready for this. You're not going to embarrass us by making a scene." My chest tightened. "Making a scene? You showed up to my house with his bags without my permission. You're the ones making a scene." Caleb finally looked up from his phone, smirking. "Wow, someone's touchy. You really think this house makes you the boss now?" That was the last straw. "Get your stuff and leave," I said quietly, my hands shaking. Mom gasped like I had just cursed at her. "Ethan, you are not kicking your brother out of your house." "Yes, I am," I snapped. "Because this is my house, not yours, and you don't get to decide who lives here." Dad stood up, towering over me. "Watch your tone. We raised you better than this." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You raised me to put everyone else first. To pay for things I couldn't afford so Caleb could have what he wanted. To work twice as hard just to get half the recognition. Not this time. The room went silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Fine, Mom said after a long pause, her voice cold. If that's how you want to be, we'll do this the hard way. Before I could ask what she meant, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She dropped it onto my kitchen counter with a loud slap. What is this? I asked, walking over and opening it. My heart sank as I saw what was inside. A printed-out listing for my house, complete with mortgage details, property value estimates, and tax information. We've spoken to a lawyer, Mom said matter-of-factly. Technically, you're not married and you don't have kids. This house is wasted space on you. We think it's in the family's best interest if Caleb eventually buys it from you. I stared at her, stunned. You want me to sell you my house? Not sell. Transfer, Dad corrected. We'd work out a fair arrangement. You'd still have a place to stay for holidays. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. They weren't just asking me to let Caleb stay here temporarily. They were openly plotting to take the house from me entirely. This is insane, I said finally, my voice quiet but shaking. You skipped my housewarming to celebrate Caleb's car, and now you're standing in my kitchen trying to take my house. Mom crossed her arms. Stop acting like a victim. You bought a house earlier than we expected. You should be happy you're in a position to help your family. Help. That word again. Help always meant me giving something up. Caleb leaned back on the couch, smirking. Honestly, bro, you're overreacting. You've always been good at bouncing back. You'll be fine. I felt something in me snap. Not anger. Not even sadness, just a cold, crystal clear resolve. Get out, I said, my voice low. Mom's eyes narrowed. Ethan, get out. There was a long pause, but something in my tone must have gotten through because Dad finally grabbed Caleb's bag and shoved it toward him. This isn't over, Dad said as they headed for the door. I didn't answer. I just stood there, my fists clenched, watching them leave. When the door finally closed behind them, I let out a long, shaky breath. My hands were still trembling, but I wasn't scared anymore. No, I was done being scared. Because if they were willing to go this far just to control something that was mine, then I needed to start thinking 3 steps ahead. I needed to stop just defending myself and start making a plan. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to make sure they never tried anything like this again. The house was so quiet after they left that I could hear my own heartbeat. I sank into one of the dining chairs, staring at the folder they'd left on the counter. The papers sat there like a threat, like proof that I wasn't imagining how far they were willing to go. I flipped through the pages again, this time more carefully. Mortgage data, property tax estimates, even notes in Mom's handwriting. One of them read, "Ask about adding Caleb to title." My chest tightened. I stayed at that table for hours, not moving, barely blinking. Part of me kept waiting for my phone to buzz with an apologia call, a text, anything to say they realized they had gone too far. But when it finally did buzz, it wasn't an apology. Mom had written, "I hope you're happy. Your father is furious. Caleb is staying with friends tonight, but this is only temporary. You're being selfish and short-sighted." I read the message 3 times before putting the phone face down. It felt like someone had pressed all the air out of me. My own family thought I was selfish for not handing over the only thing I had worked years to get. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the moment they walked in. The duffel bag thumping against the couch. The way Caleb had smirked like he had already won. My housewarming decorations were still up, the cheap fairy lights. The welcome cake sitting untouched in the fridge, and looking at them now made me feel almost foolish. Like I had been naive for thinking they'd be happy for me. The next few days were worse. The silence from my family wasn't peaceful, it was loaded. They didn't call to apologize, but word started trickling in through cousins and extended relatives. My aunt texted me, "You really upset your parents. They said you kicked them out." Another cousin chimed in, "Why are you being so hard on Caleb? It's just a house. Just a house." I stopped responding. I stopped checking the family group chat altogether. I muted it and left my phone on the counter, face down. I went to work, came home, sat in the dark living room, and just existed. The place that had felt so alive and full of potential just a week ago now felt heavy, like it was carrying their disapproval in every corner. Even sitting on my own couch felt like a fight, like I had to defend my right to simply be there. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat on the back porch. The yard was quiet except for the chirping of crickets. And for the first time, I let myself really feel everything at once. The sadness, the anger, the exhaustion. I had spent years being the good son, the one who kept the peace, who helped out, who sacrificed. And now, the first time I drew a line, they made me out to be the villain. I thought about all the little moments I had brushed off before. The times Caleb had borrowed my car and returned it empty on gas. The times I'd covered his share of bills and gotten nothing but a shrug in return. The birthdays they had forgotten. The job promotions they had barely acknowledged. Maybe I had been ignoring it for too long. That was the night I decided to stop waiting for an apology that was never coming. The next morning, I started locking everything down, literally and figuratively. I changed the locks on the house. Not because they had a key, I hadn't given them one, but because the idea of them showing up unannounced again made my stomach churn. I updated the alarm system password. I started keeping my car in the garage, out of sight. I also started pulling back from the family in other ways. I stopped showing up for Sunday dinners. When Mom called, I let it go to voicemail. When Dad texted, I left it on read. I didn't explain myself, didn't argue. I just went silent. At work, people started to notice I was quieter than usual, but I poured myself into my projects. Staying late wasn't a burden, it was an escape. The office became the one place where I didn't feel judged or pressured to justify myself. But every night, I came home to that same empty house. And every night, it reminded me why I had to do all of this. One Saturday, about a week after the confrontation, I drove out to a quiet trail just outside of town. I hadn't been hiking in years, but something about being out there, surrounded by trees and fresh air, helped me think clearly. I sat on a rock overlooking a small stream and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through old photos, Caleb's graduation, Caleb's first car, Caleb's birthday dinners, and noticed how many of those moments I had been the one behind the camera, taking pictures of everyone else celebrating. There were hardly any photos of me. I had been present for everyone else's big moments. But when it came time for mine, they couldn't even show up. By the time I stood up and started walking back down the trail, something inside me had solidified. I wasn't going to fight them for scraps of respect anymore. If they wanted to paint me as selfish, fine. I would let them. But I wasn't going to be manipulated into giving them what they wanted. And as I walked back to my car, I realized something else. I didn't just want to protect my house. I wanted to protect my peace. That night, I sat down with a notepad at the kitchen table, the same spot where I had been sitting when Mom called me that first night. This time, though, my mind wasn't foggy. I started writing down everything I needed to do financially, legally, emotionally to make sure no one could take this house from me. I made a list of lawyers in town. I looked up what it would take to put my house into a trust. I checked into tenants' rights and property laws, just in case. And as I sat there making plans in the quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt since before this all started. Control. It wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was the first step toward taking my life back. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because if they thought I was going to keep rolling over and letting them decide my future, they were in for a shock. Once I started writing things down, it became easier to breathe. The list on my notepad was long, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks: direction. Instead of sitting around waiting for the next guilt trip message, I now had a plan. The first step was talking to a lawyer. It felt strange making an appointment to discuss something as serious as property protection, but the attorney I met with, a calm, sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Reed, made me feel like I was finally on solid ground. I explained the situation carefully, leaving out as much of the raw emotion as I could, and asked what could be done to make sure no one could challenge my ownership. Ms. Reed nodded thoughtfully, scribbling notes as I spoke. "You've done everything right so far," she said. "Your name is the only one on the title, so no one has any claim to it. But if you're worried about interference, there are options, like putting the house into a living trust in your name or setting up a legal notice preventing any transfers without your approval." It was the first time in this whole ordeal that someone had told me I had power, that I had the ability to keep what was mine safe. I left her office with a folder full of documents and a checklist of steps to take. At work, things were starting to shift, too. I had been volunteering for extra projects, partly to distract myself, but now I realized those late nights were getting noticed. My boss called me into her office one Thursday afternoon and said, "Ethan, you've been knocking it out of the park lately. I want you to lead the next client presentation." Normally, that would have terrified me, but for the first time in months, I felt ready for it. I threw myself into preparing, staying late to polish every detail of the presentation. The day of the meeting, I walked into the conference room in my best suit and delivered the pitch with a calm confidence I didn't know I had. By the time I finished, the client was nodding enthusiastically. That afternoon, my boss pulled me aside and said, "If we land this contract, you'll be in line for a raise." It wasn't just about the money, though that would help. It was the validation. I was being seen, appreciated, recognized for what I brought to the table. I started to notice other small changes, too. I began going for runs in the evenings instead of sitting on the porch stewing. At first, it was exhausting, but after a few weeks, I found myself running farther, my lungs burning less, my head clearer when I got home. The anger that had been sitting in my chest started to feel like fuel instead of a weight. My social circle, which had felt painfully small for so long, began to grow again. One weekend, a coworker invited me to a barbecue at his place. I almost said no, but something in me knew I needed to go. I showed up with a six-pack and found myself laughing with people I barely knew by the end of the night. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was living in Caleb's shadow. I was just Ethan, a guy with a decent job, a house, and a life that was starting to take shape. But as good as things were getting, the silence from my family didn't go away. Every so often, Mom would leave a voicemail. "We miss you, Ethan," or "Your brother's been struggling, you know." But there was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they had tried to do. I still hadn't unmuted the family group chat, and part of me wondered if I ever would. One Friday evening after work, I went to a local hardware store and bought some paint. I had been staring at the bland beige walls of my living room for weeks, and I finally decided it was time to make the space mine. It took me all weekend, but by Sunday night, the room was a soft, warm blue, the kind that made the whole house feel calmer. I strung up new lights, rearranged the furniture, and hung up a framed photo I had taken on my hiking trip. Standing there in the middle of the room, paint on my hands, I felt something shift. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was my home. And no matter what my parents thought, they weren't going to take it away from me. The next step on my list was financial. I met with a banker to set up a separate savings account, one that no one in my family even knew existed. I started automating transfers every payday so that I could quietly build a cushion. Part of me was thinking about the future, about travel, about maybe starting a side business, but another part of me knew I might need that money for whatever was coming next, because I knew this wasn't over. One evening, while I was eating dinner and scrolling through my phone, I saw a new post from my cousin Jessica, a photo of Caleb at a fancy restaurant, grinning over a steak the size of a dinner plate. The caption read, "Celebrating a big move." My stomach tightened. I knew that grin. It was the same one he wore when he had walked into my house with his duffel bag. Sure enough, the next morning, I got a message from Dad. "We need to talk. Call me." I didn't call. Instead, I went back to my list. I called Ms. Reed, the lawyer, and told her I wanted to go through with the living trust. I spent the afternoon signing papers, notarizing forms, making everything official. When I walked out of her office, my house was no longer just something I owned. It was legally shielded. Driving home that day, with the sun setting and my favorite song playing on the radio, I felt something I hadn't felt since before this all started: peace. But it wasn't just peace. It was power. And for the first time, I realized that whatever came next, I wouldn't just be reacting. I would be ready. The following week, things at work took another turn in my favor. The client we had pitched to sign the contract, and just like my boss promised, I got a raise. Not a life-changing amount, but enough that I suddenly had breathing room. It meant my savings account would grow faster, and it meant I could start thinking about doing more than just defending what I already had. I took myself out to dinner that night, alone, sitting by the window at a quiet little Italian place. As I ate, I thought about how far I'd come in just a few weeks. The house no longer felt like a place where their voices echoed. It felt like mine again. But there was still something unsettled inside me because I knew them. My family didn't let things go. The silence was too deliberate, too calculated. I had grown up watching them use the quiet treatment as a way to break me down. First the guilt, then the forced reconciliation where I was the one apologizing. This time, I wasn't going to give them the chance. 2 days later, my prediction came true. I was coming back from a run when I saw a familiar car parked near the end of my street, my parents' car. The sight made my stomach clench, but instead of turning around or sneaking inside, I walked straight up the driveway. Mom and Dad were sitting inside, talking. When they saw me, they both got out. "We were in the neighborhood," Mom said casually, like that explained everything. "No, you weren't," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "What do you want?" Mom's expression tightened at my bluntness, but she pressed on. "We wanted to see you and talk about Caleb." I almost laughed. Of course it was about Caleb. It was always about Caleb. He's been looking for a new apartment, Dad added. But it's expensive. You have a big house, Ethan. This is just logical. Logical for you, I said, stepping back. Not for me. Mom's tone sharpened. You can't keep punishing your brother. You're hurting the family. That was the moment I realized they still didn't get it. In their minds, I was the one causing harm, not them. They had rewritten the whole situation so that I was the selfish one, the villain who refused to help. I'm not punishing anyone, I said slowly. I'm just living in the house I bought, and that's not changing. I expected them to leave after that, but instead, Mom sighed dramatically. You know, we've been talking with your uncle, she said, glancing at Dad before continuing. He thinks it would be smart to see if the deed can be restructured, just so the house stays in the family long term. I stared at her. They were still trying to take it. This time, though, I didn't panic. I didn't even feel that same helpless anger. I just smiled, a small, calm smile that seemed to throw them off. Good luck with that, I said, and turned to go inside. When I shut the door, I felt a strange rush of satisfaction. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I had already taken steps to protect myself. They could talk to whoever they wanted, but the house was now in a trust. They couldn't touch it. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, I began thinking about what else I could do, not just to protect myself, but to send a clear message that this kind of behavior wouldn't be tolerated. I started looking into local real estate boards and neighborhood associations. If they were going to keep showing up, I wanted to know exactly what my rights were when it came to trespassing. I found out I could formally request that anyone I didn't authorize be kept off my property. I even scheduled a meeting with a security company to discuss adding cameras around the house. But it wasn't just about defense anymore. A week later at work, my boss offered me a chance to attend a leadership retreat. It was all expenses paid. 3 days at a lakeside resort where we'd learn about project management, negotiation, and strategic planning. I almost turned it down. Part of me still felt guilty for spending money or time on myself. But then I thought about the duffel bag hitting my couch and Caleb's smirk. I said yes. The retreat turned out to be exactly what I needed. During one of the sessions, a speaker talked about boundaries, not in the personal sense, but in business. If you don't define the terms of engagement, he said, someone else will define them for you. That line hit me like a freight train because that was exactly what had been happening my whole life. My family had been defining the terms: who got what, who sacrificed, who gave, and I had just gone along with it. On the last night of the retreat, I stayed up late by the fire pit, notebook in hand, and started writing again. This time, though, it wasn't just about legal steps or savings goals. I wrote out what I wanted my life to look like 6 months from now, a year from now, where I wanted to be financially, emotionally, even socially. And as I wrote, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about keeping my house anymore. This was about taking control of my entire life. When I got home, I threw myself into the plan. I picked up a few freelance gigs on the side, using the extra income to accelerate my savings. I hired the security company to install discrete cameras around the property. I even joined a local homeowners association, not because I wanted to go to meetings, but because I wanted to know the rules inside and out. Then something unexpected happened. A friend from work mentioned that Caleb had been bragging about a possible promotion, but also that he'd been spending money recklessly and might be in over his head. My coworker's husband worked at the same company as Caleb and had overheard him complaining about credit card debt and car payments. That piece of information settled into my mind like a puzzle piece clicking into place, because now I knew something they didn't think I knew. Caleb wasn't just looking for a place to stay because it was convenient. He needed one because he was struggling. And suddenly, I wasn't just defending my space. I had leverage. I didn't do anything with it right away. I waited, quietly adding to my plan, quietly building up my resources. But deep down, I knew the next time they tried to push me, I wouldn't just push back. I'd be ready to flip the entire situation on its head. The moment came on a quiet Sunday afternoon, almost a month after my last confrontation with my parents. I had been patient, painfully patient, waiting for them to try again. And sure enough, they did. Mom called first, her voice almost syrupy. Ethan, honey, we've been talking. We think it's time to revisit the conversation about the house. Can we stop by tonight? A month ago, that question would have sent my chest tightening with dread. But this time, I smiled as I sat at my kitchen table, looking over my notes. Sure, I said calmly. Come by at 6. The moment I hung up, I got to work. First, I made sure the cameras I had installed were recording. Then, I set out 2 chairs at the kitchen table, directly across from where I would sit. I even brewed a pot of coffee and put out mugs, not because I planned to play host, but because I wanted them comfortable. People say more when they feel at ease. By the time the clock hit 6 o'clock, I was ready. Their car pulled into the driveway right on time. I opened the door before they knocked, gesturing them inside like nothing was wrong. Dad seemed wary, but Mom smiled like this was some kind of reconciliation dinner. "We're glad you agreed to talk," she said as they sat down. I nodded, sitting opposite them. "So let's talk." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Mom launched into the speech I'd been expecting, about how Caleb was struggling, about how I was the only one who could help, about how family was supposed to make sacrifices. I let her go on, nodding occasionally, keeping my face calm. When she finished, I leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said before, about doing the right thing for the family. And I agree, which is why I wanted you both to come here." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the legal paperwork Ms. Reed had prepared, the trust documents, the notarized agreements, and a notice formally stating that no one was allowed on the property without my consent. Mom's smile faltered as she flipped through the pages. "What is this?" "It's legal protection," I said evenly. "This house is now in a trust, which means it can't be sold, transferred, or used as collateral without my approval. And because I filed a notice of no trespass, if anyone including Caleb shows up here without my permission, I can have them removed legally." Dad's jaw tightened. "You went to a lawyer?" "Yes," I said. "I took your advice. You said to think about the future and do what's best for everyone. This is what's best for me. And since I'm the only one paying for this house, that's the decision that matters." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the fridge. Mom finally set the papers down. "Ethan, this is extreme. We're just asking you to be reasonable." "No," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You're asking me to give up my peace so Caleb can avoid facing the consequences of his choices. That's not reasonable. That's manipulation." Dad's face darkened. "You're making a mistake. Family is all you have." I smiled faintly. "Then maybe you should have treated me like family before trying to take the one thing I worked for." That was when I played my final card. "I know about Caleb's situation," I said quietly, watching their faces. "The car payments, the credit card debt, the fact that he can't afford his own place. That's not my problem, and it's not going to become my problem." Mom's mouth opened slightly, shocked that I knew. Dad's eyes narrowed. "You've been talking to people," he said slowly. "I've been paying attention," I corrected, "and I've been taking notes. Every message you sent me, every voicemail, every visit, I have it all documented." I gestured toward the small camera on the counter, its light blinking softly. "And now I have this conversation too. So, if you ever try to pressure me again or spread lies about me to the rest of the family, I'll have proof." The silence that followed was heavy, but I didn't look away. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said after a moment. "I'm doing it because I need boundaries. If you can respect them, great. If not, I'll enforce them." I stood, signaling that the conversation was over. "Coffee?" I asked lightly, as if nothing serious had just been said. Neither of them answered. They left a few minutes later, Dad muttering something under his breath, Mom looking shaken. As their car pulled out of the driveway, I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in months. This wasn't just a victory. It was a shift in the entire balance of power. They had come expecting me to fold. Instead, they left knowing that every attempt to pressure me from now on would come with consequences. I locked the door, poured myself a cup of the coffee I'd brewed, and sat at the kitchen table. For the first time, the silence in the house didn't feel oppressive. It felt like freedom. And though I wasn't done not yet, he knew I had just taken back control of the narrative. The next move was theirs, and whatever it was, I'd be ready. The next few days were oddly quiet, too quiet. After the confrontation, I half expected another round of angry texts or late-night voicemails, but nothing came. No calls, no guilt-tripping messages, not even a passive-aggressive meme in the group chat. At first, I wondered if this was just the calm before the storm. But as the week dragged on, I realized something. They were regrouping. I kept living my life. I went to work, focused on projects, kept running in the evenings, and even started redecorating another room in the house. Every little change I made, new curtains, a new shelf, a photo I hung on the wall, felt like reclaiming another piece of my space. Then one Friday evening, I got the message that made everything click into place. It wasn't from Mom or Dad this time. It was from Caleb. It read, "You win. Hope you're happy. Lost the car. Might be moving back home." I read it 3 times, the corners of my mouth slowly turning up. I didn't reply, but a few hours later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Dad. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was heavy, tired. Your mother and I wanted to let you know that Caleb had to return the SUV. He couldn't keep up with the payments. I stayed quiet, waiting for the inevitable follow-up. He's going to be staying with us for a while, Dad continued reluctantly. It'll be tight, but we'll manage. There it was. The shift. The quiet acknowledgement that the plan to use my house had failed. I'm sorry to hear that, I said evenly. And I meant it. Not because I wanted Caleb to lose his car, but because I knew this was going to be hard for him. Hard, but necessary. There was a pause on the other end. Then Dad sighed. Ethan, we might have gone too far. I blinked, surprised. My father was not a man who admitted fault easily. We just wanted to make things easier for him, he said quietly. But we should have respected that this house is yours. Your mother knows that now, too. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I hope so, I said finally. Because if you ever try something like that again, you know what will happen. We know, Dad said. When we hung up, I sat there for a while, letting the weight of that conversation settle in. It wasn't an apology that erased everything, but it was an acknowledgement, and that was enough for now. The next weekend, Mom called and asked if she could come by alone. I said yes, cautiously. She arrived with a plate of homemade cookies, the kind she used to bake when I was a kid. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where so many of our fights had started, and for the first time in months, we actually talked. I pushed too hard, she admitted, stirring her coffee. We all did. I think we forgot that you're not just part of this family. You're your own person, too. I nodded slowly. That's all I've ever wanted you to see. She reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. I see it now. And I'm proud of you, for buying this house, for standing up for yourself. Something in my chest loosened at those words. I didn't know if everything could ever go back to how it was, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe things weren't supposed to go back. Maybe this was a new beginning, one with boundaries, respect, and balance. When she left, I stood by the door for a moment, looking around my home. The late afternoon light was streaming through the windows, warm and golden, and for the first time, I felt at peace. A week later, I hosted a second housewarming. This time, just for the friends I'd made at work and a couple of neighbors I'd gotten to know. The house was full of laughter, music, and the smell of good food. No guilt, no tension, no duffel bags waiting to be unpacked. And as I stood in the kitchen, drink in hand, looking out at the people smiling and chatting in my living room, I realized something. This was what a home was supposed to feel like. Not a bargaining chip, not a symbol of obligation, a place where I could be myself, on my own terms. Later that night, when everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, I stepped out onto the porch. The sky was clear, the stars bright. I thought about the months of tension, the fights, the tears I had hidden when no one could see. And I smiled, because I had faced them down, stood my ground, and come out stronger. I took a slow sip of my drink, feeling the cool night air. They thought they could take my house. I murmured to myself, a quiet satisfaction in my voice. Turns out, all they did was teach me how to protect it. And with that, I turned off the porch light and went inside, closing the door behind me. Not to shut the world out, but to finally, fully live in the home that was mine.